There
Right.
you are. Hello, everyone.
You can start now, Carlos. Thank you so much for waiting.
All right. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Especially thanks to the panelists, because I know it's very early for you guys in the US. So thank you for making the time. Um, and welcome everyone to the Commercial Lunar Applications panel. We're the first panel of the conference, so we're happy to open the Access Space Alliance conference. Hopefully, with an exciting discussion on the future of the lunar industry. And I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Carlos Entrena. I'm the CEO of +Ultra-Space Outpost, and I'm the chair of the Lunar Development Committee within the ACCESS.SPACE Alliance. And the reason for this panel is, of course, the next moon race is upon us, and every day we learn about new lunar missions and new services being planned. And within the next decade, we expect now, the latest report from NSR was about 140 lunar missions for the next 10 years. That was unbelievable just 5 years ago. Even a year ago, numbers this high would be completely unbelievable for absolutely anyone. And within this new lunar economy, within this new lunar industry that is appearing, from the Lunar Development Committee, we believe that interoperability and coordination will be key to ensure the future lunar service providers can actually find customers on the moon so that they reach them at the same time and they can talk with each other. And it is very important as well that we know everything that is going on in the lunar industry, because there's a lot of talk being taken over from the big companies, the big players like SpaceX, but there's a lot of small companies doing a lot of very cool stuff that don't get the visibility they deserve. And you also are probably familiar with the Going Back to the Moon webinar series that we have already started. We've had already 3 very cool discussions there in lunar communications, landers, and on the needs of the lunar industry. And with this panel, we aim to continue the work done, and we've aimed to have this time a very varied panel covering also some of the lesser talked about applications on the moon, but they're still extremely interesting and necessary for the future of the lunar economy. So today we have with us Mike Curtis-Rouse from Satellite Catapult. We've got Elliot Carroll from Lunar Resources Incorporated. We've got Andrew Gemmer from Lunar Outpost, and Mike Provenzano from Astrobotic. And thank you everyone again for joining us here today. And we will begin the panel today with a short presentation from each of the panelists. And after that, we will move on to questions to the panel discussion. And we will, of course, take as well questions from the audience. So we will start with Mike Curtis-Rouse. Let me just share the presentations. If I find the right screen to share, this should be it. All right. Is everyone seeing the right presentation? All right. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. Good morning and good afternoon to those of you around the world joining us. So I'm Mike Curtis-Rouse. I'm head of manufacturing for space for the Satellite Applications Catapult based in the UK. We're a research technology organization with a focus on making space, satellite technology, and the services and products derived from those accessible to all and usable by all. We're here to accelerate and effectively improve commercial access to space, and this is a very apt opportunity to talk. So next slide, please. So the question I'm posing more than anything is, what is the moon? What is, from a lunar perspective, what does the moon mean to us? Is the moon about science? Are we talking about going to the moon for commercial science? Are we going there to look at using telescopes to understand our cosmic origin? Are we going there to understand more about the universe, more about our solar system, and more about our origin? Or are we going to the moon for other reasons? Next slide, please. So from my perspective, what I would like to present is the moon is product. The moon is not science. And yes, some might argue the moon could be both. But from my perspective, the moon is product. The moon is an environment where we can take product from it. We can equally take product to it, but we can exploit the resources upon the moon to create additional products and services. And this is really where I think new space starts to get exciting. Effectively, when we look at what we could have done in orbit before, what we have done in orbit to date, using satellites, using services, using space stations, all of those activities in a way par when, in comparison when we start looking towards the moon. The moon gives us that opportunity to do so much more. And the opportunity there is in terms of what can we do with the moon. So hence calling the moon product rather than mission. Next slide, please. So really, I want to talk about what can the moon offer us? Well, fundamentally, I think it can offer us 5 things. Clearly, oxygen, fuel, water, the ability to construct or make things, and potentially equally energy. Those first 3, oxygen, fuel, and water, can be effectively derived from ice. And we know there's in excess of around 600 million tons at the lunar poles. So realistically, we can extract that ice, utilize it to make oxygen, we can use it to make fuel, and we can make water. Those products can be used on the moon, but more importantly, they can be used elsewhere in the solar system, or perhaps more explicitly in low Earth orbit. We can move those back to effectively towards the Earth via a variety of means, and that gives us the ability to do more. So we're taking something from the moon to give us ourselves the capability to do more in the vicinity of the Earth, not necessarily doing anything on the moon in the first place, not necessarily doing science. I would also argue that effectively from a construction and energy perspective, the moon does give us that ability to do more using those capabilities. So we can use regolith, and we know there are early experiments already looking at what we can do with regolith. We can potentially do something with the minerals there, but both the construction of what we utilize on the moon and likewise the energy we can gain, whether that is equally from production of electricity or collection of solar, etc., we can also utilize elsewhere in the solar system. So the question I would present, the question I would ask my adjacent panelists, the question I would ask the participants are, do we go to the moon for science? Do we go to the moon for product? Do we go to the moon for resource? Or do we go to the moon for all 3? What does the moon mean to us? To me, I see it as effectively a source of resource, a source of product, and something which in turn gives us pure commercial exploitation. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike, for the presentation and for the very good question. I think that will be a great discussion during the panel, whether we're going for the moon for science or whether we're going for, we're seeing the moon as a product. So I will be looking forward to what the other panelists have to say on that. Next up, we have with us Elliot Carroll from Lunar Resources, the CEO. Elliot, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carlos. And Mike, great introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elliot Carroll, and I'm the CEO of Lunar Resources. Lunar Resources is a space industrial company with an aim to industrialize the cislunar domain. We are developing the space manufacturing and lunar mining technologies, which have broad applications from low Earth orbit down to the lunar surface. Our 2 most prominent technologies are space deposition, which is the process of fabricating thin film materials, such as solar cells and antennas in the vacuum of space, including on the lunar surface, as well as functional coatings, such as optical coatings for remote sensing payloads and emissivity coatings for spacecraft. Space deposition is becoming a critical technology across the on-orbit servicing, manufacturing, and assembly segment, also known as OSAM, of the space sector, and one of the most enabling technologies for space industrialization. Our second well-known technology is molten regolith electrolysis, which is an electrochemical process to extract and refine the lunar soil into its raw commodities, including oxygen and its constituent metals and alloys. The technology is unique as you only need the metal oxide, which for lunar applications is the lunar soil, electricity, and gravity. That is all, no reagents, no chemicals, just the lunar soil, electricity, and gravity. This technology is under rapid development, and we plan to announce new developments in the coming months for upcoming missions. And by developing these 2 technologies, amongst other less-known technologies we are also developing, our goal is to enable an in-situ manufacturing architecture. Now, if you look in the background of this slide, you may be able to see 2 of our core technologies, which in the background is our molten regolith electrolysis system, and then in the front is a rover, which is actually manufacturing solar cells through our deposition technology. Carlos, can you go to the next slide, or do I have permission to move?
I'll
All right.
move to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned, we're combining our technologies to enable in-situ manufacturing architecture, which means we would like to fabricate materials and manufacture products in space from the materials off Earth to enable exploration and eventual colonization in the solar system. Our current focus is developing an in-situ manufacturing architecture to enable microgravity manufacturing of large space structures, servicing of space assets, and construction of lunar infrastructure. So I look forward to the panel discussion today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Elliot. I'm really looking forward to learning more about what you guys are doing in terms of lunar infrastructure. Definitely looking forward to that. And thank you for the very good presentation. And up next, we have with us Andrew Gemmer from Lunar Outpost. He's the CTO of a very cool company. Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Carlos. As Carlos mentioned, my name is Andrew Gemmer, AJ, and I am the CTO of Lunar Outpost located in Golden, Colorado. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about Lunar Outpost.
There it is. Sorry.
Our mission is to develop technology that both enables a sustainable presence on the lunar surface now and in the future, while also creating Earth analogs that can drive innovation, create revenue for our company, and have a positive impact on people here on Earth. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more about our company and where we came from. Lunar Outpost was founded in 2017. Oh, next slide, please. Founded in 2017, as I mentioned, we're headquartered in Golden, Colorado, nearby a number of other aerospace companies and research institutions with whom we work very closely. In that time, we've been granted a planetary robotics contract from NASA, as well as advanced instrumentation contracts from the U.S. Air Force, Space Force, and the Air Force Research Laboratory for advanced instrumentation and robust space systems. We also developed a life support system, which is on board a Lunar Gateway space station prototype at Kennedy Space Center, which is based on our Canary air quality monitoring systems. That's one of our commercial products that we developed early on to generate revenue and, as I mentioned, help people here on Earth in the near term. But that technology is also applicable to space in the form of space stations and habitats, things like that, where air quality will be a big factor for humans. Based on our work with the Canary Air Quality Monitoring System, we've won a number of notable awards, including the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge to improve air quality for school children around the U.S., as well as CERAWeek's Energy Innovation Pioneer Award. Next slide. We have a number of interesting upcoming opportunities. We procured the first ever sale of space resources to NASA in the form of a contract to gather and transfer ownership of lunar regolith to NASA on our upcoming mission with our rover. 2 rovers we have are slated to fly to the moon in 2022. These are commercially funded missions for 2022 and another in 2023. And we have a number of partnerships with NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload System lander providers. So we are a mobility system provider that complements their landing capabilities. We also recently acquired a company called Destiny Space Systems, which is working with the MOXIE instrument on board NASA's Perseverance Mars rover to create oxygen from Mars' CO2 atmosphere. Next slide. So focusing in on our space robotics work, this picture here is our Mobile Autonomous Prospecting Platform rover, or MAP. Next slide. So we believe that, that prospecting is really the vital next step in lunar exploration and resource utilization. So we agree completely with what Mike and Elliot said, that the moon provides a number of excellent commercial products: oxygen, fuel, water, construction materials, as well as a unique environment for manufacturing with vacuum, microgravity, and thermal conditions. But in order to effectively utilize those conditions and access those materials, you need to know where they are, what forms they're in, what the risks are with accessing them, and that is what we define as prospecting, hence the P in the MAP rover name. So our MAP rovers can be used to produce a lunar resource map and to find those resources that I mentioned. In addition, we are able to carry commercial and scientific payloads to contribute to lunar data sets about the conditions on the lunar surface. We like to say that we build the truck and our customers tell us what to put in it. And we envision map rovers as a system working together with remote sensing, lunar orbiting satellites, the landers themselves, and other rovers, and in addition to operating in swarms of rovers to get better coverage and greater payload capabilities. Next slide. So the map rover is quite far along already. We listed as TRL 6. Here's some pictures of activities we've been doing with MAP recently, including night testing of our autonomous navigation and obstacle avoidance algorithms, testing in lunar testbed facilities to simulate dust loading and wear on our systems. We are fortunate to have access to the Great Sand Dunes National Park there in the lower left, which provides a decent lunar surface analog, and we do a lot of our navigation and mobility testing there, as well as testing inside of a dusty thermal vacuum chamber, again, to evaluate the effects on the rover systems. Next slide. So moving into the future, we want to be a part of this new space paradigm of continuous deliveries to the lunar surface, landers landing at regular intervals and dropping off one or many rovers and scientific and commercial payloads. So MAP is really ideal for that. It could host a number of technology maturation payloads and lunar demonstrations, things like drills, spectrometers, new communication systems and power systems, as well as customers for the data generated during our surface opportunities. So with that, looking forward to answering your questions in the rest of the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, AJ. So the final presentation for today and the final panelist is Mike Provenzano from Astrobotic. Let me switch presentations here. He's the Director of Planetary Mobility. Mike, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Carlos. And Carlos, I actually can't share my video. It says that I'm denied. I don't know if that's something you can control.
I'm not sure, just let me check. Maybe I can.
If not, no worries.
It's now on.
Ah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
There it is.
Great. All right. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. Appreciate being here. I'm the Director of Planetary Mobility. My name is Mike Provenzano. You can go to the next slide. So I'm really just going to talk about some of the technologies that Astrobotic is developing. I only have 2 slides. The first slide here, we have our company is divided into 3 different technical departments. On the left, you can see our Planetary Landers department. We have 2 funded lander missions to the moon. Our Peregrine mission, which is going to be flying later this year, has 15 payloads manifested. Most are commercial, and then some of which are also funded by NASA. We received an $80 million contract about 2 years ago to integrate their payloads on our lander and fly them to the moon. And then we also received last year a $200 million mission to fly our Griffin lander to the moon, carrying NASA's Viper rover. And that rover is a really exciting mission. It's going to be prospecting, looking for water ice at the south pole of the moon, and hopefully drilling to recover those resources and send that data back to Earth. And that mission is going to be flying in 2023. On the right, we have our Future Missions and Technology group. It's one of our departments at Astrobotic. They work on a lot of autonomous sensing and navigation solutions. So they have a sensor that's going to be integrated to the bottom of our lander to help us land autonomously without human control. And that uses terrain relative navigation to help us land. We also have a lot of mission simulation software, and that helps us plan our routes in advance. It can help us simulate our lighting conditions prior to landing, and also understand, I guess, where the selenologic features are located across the moon. These are just highlights of some of the technologies. Both of these groups are working on other technologies as well, but these are some of the flagship products of their groups. You go to the next slide. And then this is the Planetary Mobility Department at Astrobotic. This is the one that my team and I work in. And these are some of the products that we're developing at the moment. We have Moon Ranger. It's an autonomous rover that's going to be flying to the moon in late 2022 on Maston's lander. And that water is integrated with a neutron spectrometer system from AIMS. NASA aims, and it's going to be looking for water ice at the south pole of the moon. If this rover does find water ice on the moon, then it'll be the first rover to ever discover water on another planetary body, which to us and to me is just an incredible mission to be a part of. So we're just so thrilled to be a part of that. We also have our Cube rover on the right. Cube rover is really it's our flagship product line for the department. We offer different sizes of rovers to accommodate different payloads. And this rover was really developed with the customer in mind. Specifically, this is meant to integrate lots of different payloads inside of our very flexible payload envelope that you can't really see here, but it's underneath the bottom of the rover. And essentially it's like a cube sat. So we have a 2U size cube rover, a 4U size cube rover, a 6U size cube rover, and each one as it grows scales with the payloads that it's able to accommodate. And really we see this as a delivery platform. It offers a delivery service for payloads to get them from point A to point B on the moon. And Mike Curtis-Rouse gave a very good introduction today about talking about how do we see the moon as a product or science. To answer that question, I think that we developed this rover to do all of those things. So it can carry science instruments, it can do technology demonstrations, it can explore, it can be upgraded to be autonomous. So lots of possibilities. Our VSAT stands for Vertical Solar Array Technology. We were recently awarded by NASA to develop a power grid on the moon. And this VSAT can deploy and provide 10 kilowatts of power. So we're really excited about this. We're just about to kick this contract off. And this is really kind of embarking in a new area where we see is really important to any company that's going to engage with the moon is having a power infrastructure to tap into and use so you can survive through the night and continuously power assets. Polaris is our much larger vehicle. It's about the size of a golf cart. We have this at our facility. You can drive it around in our sand bed. It's about 300 kilograms, can carry about 100 kilograms of payload, communicates direct to Earth. So it has an antenna on the top, doesn't need to relay communication through a lander. And then we have our wireless chargers on the bottom left there. This is also something we started about a year ago. We're working with a company called Outpost in the US. And this is really opening up a lot of capabilities for us to charge not only rovers, but lots of other assets on the surface as well. We offer these in 120 watt and 400 watt units. It makes missions much more simple. Instead of having to tether cords back and forth to power different devices, you can simply drive up next to a lander or a power structure and receive power that way. And then lastly, we're working on GPR, ground penetrating radar antennas. We have a contract to develop an ultra wideband antenna that is from a very low frequency range up to a very high frequency range, meaning that we can look deep under the surface of the moon and also in shallow surfaces as well. And this is a really low profile, lightweight antenna that can actually be integrated underneath one of our cube rovers. And that is the plan, is to eventually fly it on one of our cube rovers. And I think that's it. I have one more slide with my contact information on the end. If anybody has any questions, we would love to hear from you. We're always trying to improve our product lines. And specifically, if any of you are payload developers, I would love to hear from you because your input helps us make our product lines better. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you everyone for the presentations. I think that's definitely a lot of content for us to start discussing. And I see we have already some questions from the audience. I would like to start before that. I think we can all start our videos again. And I would like to start first with some questions for the individual panelists, and then we can start bringing in questions for the audience. And I would like to start with Mike Curtis-Rouse. Mike, I don't know if you can tell us a bit more about what satellite Catapult is doing in terms of manufacturing on the moon or any other lunar activity. So what is the core competency that you guys are developing?
Sure. So the Catapult is a little like a Fraunhofer organization for those people who are not familiar with UK catapults. And we have 9 catapults in the UK focused over a variety of technology areas. We're the only one which focuses on space. And right now, I have to admit, Lunar is a pretty bold and new area for us. But one of the areas we're interested in exploring, and we're talking with a variety of industrial partners and research organizations focused partially around communications. So looking at a combination of 4 and 5G communications for providing effectively ubiquitous connectivity, holistic communications for the lunar surface, because ultimately it doesn't really matter what you're operating on the lunar surface. At some point, you're going to have to talk back both to low lunar orbit and eventually back to the Earth. So that's going to be fundamentally a key part of it. And we work with the European Space Agency, we work with other aspects of the UK Space Agency, and we're looking at a whole variety of companies who currently have aspirations which may exist today, or they might have aspirations to look to in the future. The other area which we're involved in is looking at the use of new power forms for the moon. So recognizing that we can certainly use solar for some activities on the moon, the reality is that almost certainly we're going to need to look to some form of fission-based product for really long-term activity. So we're talking with a variety of companies in the UK and some of those in the US in terms of how can we use nuclear in terms of small reactor-based power sources to power activities on the moon for not just base activity, but also for rover activity. I think the interesting aspect there is there's clearly a direct analog in terms of what do we do on the Earth where we need high intensity energy activities and where is the synergy with that on the moon. So really, those are our areas we're looking at. But as a research and technology organization, we have interest in just about everything. And my team are frequently critical of the fact that I would tend to run off over looking at a new innovation or a new idea. So my current idea, which is I think has potential, is the utilization of railguns to put product off the moon rather than, for example, using chemical thrusters. Some might have concerns about that from a defense and security perspective, but I see that as a really simplistic way of moving product from the moon back to the Earth.
Definitely. I cannot wait to see railguns on the moon. That's going to be very cool. All right. Thank you, Mike. Elliot, one question for you and about lunar resources. So what do you feel are the most pressing near-term needs for lunar applications of your company's technology? So where do you see, are you planning on? Yeah, sure. Sorry, go.
Yeah. So, right now ISRU is big within NASA for oxygen production. But as we begin to model out both from a cost perspective and from an operational perspective, the Artemis program, more and more apparent it becomes to us is that there is going to be a huge need for construction. Now on Earth, everyone has a general idea of what construction is, but on the moon, it is much different. And I'm sure, Mike and AJ can certainly speak to this when they're looking at lunar missions. So the moon is a vacuum. So, if you want to make solar cells on the moon, you can do that directly on the moon. You don't need a vacuum chamber or anything else. If you want to make transmission lines on the moon, you can do that directly on the moon as well through a very, basic rover that actually Lunar Resources is working with Astrobotic to help develop. We see a huge amount of demand for infrastructure on the moon, power infrastructure, communication infrastructure, even just things as simple as roads and landing pads, which is really being ignored by the broader community. I think they're just assuming NASA or the US government will just build it somehow and it'll magically appear there for everyone to use. But in the near term, yes, there is demand for oxygen, but you need a heck of a lot of oxygen to fuel up a Starship rocket or Starship lander. So, we see immediate demand for metals, which I think will help dictate how the development of the moon will formalize.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Elliot. AJ, one question for you that I think is definitely interesting. So how do you see your company adding value to this lunar economy, and how do you see this evolving over time?
Yeah, so I think Lunar Outpost really plans to add value in providing access to difficult to reach locations. We do that with our robotics here on Earth, but as well as with the MAP rover on the moon. So not just where you can land. And also I saw a question in the Q&A about, why the moon and not Mars. We do, want to work on other planetary bodies as well. So as I mentioned in my introduction, we build the truck and our customers tell us, what to put in it, where it needs to go and how it needs to operate. And so in that way, we feel that we can really support NASA's Moon to Mars plan to mature and develop technology on the lunar surface with a view on moving to Mars, hence our acquisition of Destiny Space Systems and working with the MOXIE instrument to produce oxygen on Mars. So really, we want to be a part of that expansion, first into cislunar space and helping to support the commercial activity there, but then further on.
All right. Yeah, looking forward to Mars as well. We often get that question. Everyone that works on the moon gets always this question: why the moon and not Mars? And I'm happy to see that most people nowadays just answer why not both. And I believe that's the right answer, to be honest. All right, so Mike Provenzano, before we move on to the questions from the Q&A, because they're really piling up, one question just for you. So you've gone very well very in detail through the products that your company is developing. What do you think your company needs from the rest of the lunar industry to realize your full potential? So you are the ones bringing us there, but what do you need to actually make this a commercial service outside of the government and make it as sustainable in the long term?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think being a nascent industry, we're faced with the challenge of, what do the payload developers need? And often the payload developers don't often know what they need until we really sit down and we think about our missions together and understand the constraints. So often when we try to ask groups about their interfaces and, what do they care about when we hook them up to our landers and to our rovers, not everybody's able to answer those questions. And usually it takes a well thought out mission plan with some incentive, usually space agency funding that science opportunity for them to develop that plan and understand what the payload looks like and how it interfaces with our different product lines. So the first step is getting space agencies invested in going to the moon, which we have now, which is really exciting. The next step is once people are on board and we have a continuous supply of missions to the moon, is then industry will get more involved and you'll start to see more organizations. The hope is that sustainably you'll cross that chasm of just governments funding space missions and you'll get organizations, commercial organizations that want to go to the moon for good and using resources to go further into the solar system or productize it. So I think right now we're in that stage of collecting requirements from different payload developers that want to fly on use our delivery services, but they need those funds and they need those opportunities where they can continue to develop their own payloads and fly them to the moon. And I think once we get past that, the real excitement will begin, which is a sustainable lunar economy.
All right, looking forward to that. Okay, so let's move on to questions from the audience because I see there's a lot of interest on the moon. By the way, guys, you can type answers, I believe, directly on the questions from the Q&A. So I will be picking some that I think are interesting for the panel, but if you see one that you want to answer, you can directly do that by typing the answer. So let's start with the first one from Massimo Di Blasio, which I think is a very interesting question, and I think it's open for everyone. How will you work around the fact that various governments will likely limit moon exploration in the beginning due to potential concerns with the strategic and military importance to those governments? Anyone wants to take that?
Sorry, Carlos, can you just repeat the question? I had some audio challenges.
Sure. So Massimo Di Blasio asks, how will you work around the fact that various governments are likely to limit moon exploration in the beginning due to potential concerns with the strategy of or military importance of the moon to said governments?
I can start this one off. So within the U.S., there is a focus to explore the moon for civil and exploration purposes. And as per the Moon Treaty, there won't, the military is not allowed to develop permanent presence on the moon or permanent facilities on the moon. So at least within our own experience, we don't see that as a major concern in the United States.
I'll add on to that and say that we're seeing some exciting progress in that NASA's CLPS missions, which is the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, that's their method of funding commercial providers to deliver goods to the moon. They are working with different international space agencies to barter rides to the moon in exchange for payload development. So we're seeing there's Canadian LEAP Fund, which is developing payloads. and ultimately planning to fly them on CLPS landers, and in exchange for ultimately offering science data in return for those missions that go to the moon. So I think we can continue to see collaborations like that. That is, I think, also very traditional, is that different agencies tend to barter back and forth with each other in exchange for goods and services. I hope that we can continue to leverage those kinds of services that are going to the moon in the near term, that would allow us to open up, as Elliot was talking, more civil and exploration opportunities between different governments.
And I think, echoing what both Mike and Elliot have both just said, the reality is that the moon is becoming commercialized. And as with the exploration of the world in the last 200 or 300 years, governments may well say, actually, we don't want you to do that. But entrepreneurs, adventurers, pioneers doesn't usually stop them. They usually get there one way or another. And right now, what is super exciting is with the range of different commercial services being offered to get product to the moon, to get platforms there. I think any government which says, you know what, you can't go there and you can't do that, someone's just going to say, okay, we're not going to do it from here. We're just going to move the flag of our organization from wherever you are to Luxembourg, the United States, to Canada, to Brazil, etc., to someone who supports us. So any government who says you can't do this, the only consequence will be that government, that nation will be the poorer for it. So right now, it's a fruit basket. It's a great opportunity. And I think governments, they're likely to be wary. And sure, there are strategic and defense interests and things there. But the reality is economic growth usually beats just about everything. So I suspect while it might be an issue for some, it's going to be a great opportunity for many.
Yeah, and those are my thoughts exactly. It really is in the best interest of governments to, I think, encourage and support commercial cislunar activity, because it means more and better and faster technologies and capabilities available to them and to other nations, other friendly nations.
And I think maybe one more comment on this too is Mike touched on this, talking about moving to different countries and planting your flag in a different area if you're having ultimately not being able to get there yourself where you are. I think that we're seeing a lot of excitement in private industry in terms of private funding. And for example, ACCESS.SPACE is a competitor to Astrobotic, but they've raised funding in Japan to fly their own commercial mission to the moon, which is great. I think that more companies that we see like that, the more that our companies here on the panel and those that are in the audience are successful, the more it brings that business case to fruition and makes other investors say, there actually is a business model here. Here's a business case. Let's fund other companies. And that's a private funding that can stimulate a lot of other missions to the moon, which then brings down the barriers to entry for everybody else.
It's great, Mike, that you bring up the topic of the funding, because that's a very great bridge into the next question from Richard Godwin. And it's again for everyone. So what kind of success are your companies finding in acquiring funding from the private sector? So angels, venture capitals, banks, so not space agencies or governments in general.
I'm happy to open that one. So in our early stages, Astrobotic survived off of private funding. I think that's a typical growth path for companies, is to use venture capital or private funding to grow until you have sustainable kind of contracts. As of now, we're mostly not private capital. Mostly we're organic growth through contracts, and most of our company is actually owned by employees, which is really something we're proud of. And that's really helpful for a lot of different reasons. But I think that we're certainly open to private funding, and as things progress in the economy, that if there's an investor out there that is willing to help us get to our next mission, maybe it's Mars, then we would be open to it.
Yeah, in the VC community, you really have seen at least a level of interest that wasn't seen 2 or 3 years ago when it comes to space hardware, but also in this segment related to the moon and space industrialization in general. So it's still a challenge to find VCs that are willing to allocate capital, but at this point, at the very least, they're willing to at least talk with you. And I likely that will begin to formulate into actual money in the next year or so.
To add on to that, from Lunar Outpost, we've also adopted the strategy of establishing those near-term Earth-based revenue sources. So really that space to Earth and Earth to space flow of technology. And so we've been largely driven by sales of our Canary air quality monitoring systems and space robotics.
And from our perspective, we work with a variety of VCs, angel seed fund investors, etc., and we help at least push them in the direction of companies who want to invest in these areas and need support. I think the observation I have at the moment, though, which is interesting, is that we're seeing a lot of industrial primes, Airbus, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, and others, looking to actively invest into the areas where they don't have the agility to do so themselves. So we're seeing a lot of smaller companies being helped by the bigger companies, but on the basis that small companies innovate faster, better, adapt to the challenges, and come up often with far more commercially viable solutions. So again, I think the commercial space is ripe for investment as much as it is for innovation.
I would like to follow up on one thing that you mentioned, Mike Curtis-Rouse, about the big companies willing to play with the smaller ones. So how easy is it for small companies, newcomers, to work with these big behemoths? Is it, I mean, I understand from a financial point of view, it's of course worth it, but is there a risk that they bring too much bureaucracy or too much old space approach to the table and they kind of kill the innovation from the small company? Or what is your experience with that?
Yeah, it's a good point, Carlos. I think in the past that certainly was an issue, but I think through experience, organizations, whether they are consortia like OneWeb or whether they are, very pure primes like Northrop, are learning that if you impose your bureaucracy on the companies you're trying to work with and the companies you're trying to innovate with, you lose any benefit. And all you do basically is you make yourself into an entity that smaller companies, because gossip is rife, and small companies will actively tell each other, stay away from X because we just spent 6 months filling out paperwork and we never got anywhere. So, I think reputation takes you a really long way. And I think that over the last 3 or 4 years, enough of the large companies have realized that if they want to play ball with small companies, they've got to be as flexible, effectively, from the bureaucracy side as they do in terms of the innovation they want to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that too. And from our perspective, we're working with a number of Fortune 100 companies in the US, and it's really important that we keep our core competencies and our identity when we work with those groups. And it's important up front, as Mike is saying, to just make sure you carve out those things. We have teaming agreements where we say Astrobotic will do X and other company will do Y. And that's important because, in the case of Astrobotic, we've prided ourselves off of catering to payload customers and making sure that our interfaces are easy to integrate with and that we're affordable. And we don't want to lose that when we partner with our other companies here. So yeah, very important that you keep your sense of core competencies and carve those out when you work with bigger partners. But it's a really good opportunity, and it's a very good way for smaller companies like many of ours here right now to continue to grow and gain access to the bigger community.
All right, thank you, Mike. Another question from the audience from Joshua Newman, taking up again the regulatory topic, because I think this is a very interesting one. Again, a question for everyone. What, if any, are the potential regulatory challenges that you foresee when harvesting a moon resource? And how do you see that land grab, quotation marks, playing out between private and public sectors?
I can take a stab at this one. So as I think most folks know on the call, the U.S. passed legislation all the way back in 2015 to allow any U.S. company to utilize, sell, and do otherwise space resources, including asteroids and the moon and so forth. So from a regulatory perspective or legalities perspective, if you're a U.S. company, we have very little to no concern about whether we're able to go to the moon and utilize those resources. Now, the bigger concern is, it's not even a concern, it's really a point of discussion at this point, is how do you go to the moon in a respectful way? How do you go in the moon in a way to allow for industrialization without destroying the environment? And on the moon, there, at Lunar Resources, there are two key aspects that we're concerned about. Number one is just the activity that goes on the moon and protecting the far side of the moon in its cone of radio silence. So on the far side of the moon, it's one of the only places in the inner solar system where you can do very low frequency radio observatory. And protecting that is absolutely going to be critical for the next generation of science. So, and actually Lunar Resources has a program called the FarView program to actually go and make, it's a concept program to make a 400-kilometer radio observatory on the far side of the moon. And then number two is, of course, the concern of just general dust as we have very large landers landing on the moon. By no means are we considering strip mining the lunar surface, but there are other activities that are going to throw a lot of dust on the moon, and considering its limited gravity and no atmosphere, or lack thereof of atmosphere, that dust is going to settle on solar arrays, it's going to settle on habitats, it's going to settle on rovers, and to limit that dust is going to be critical. So the U.S. is actively looking at legislation to limit this. They're also looking at legislation to really give out mining rights to companies. So there is a process to do so versus, you stick your company flag on the moon in this area and it's just yours. So that's my perspective.
And speaking to the public-private interaction portion of the question, I think in the past, say if NASA needed a sample of something, they would design the entire mission, build all the hardware, the lander, the collection mechanism, and all of that, and go and get their sample. But here going into the future, I think we're moving to this more public-private partnership method where they're more willing to contract that out to private companies. And in that way, like I said earlier, they stand to benefit by more rapid technology development and maturation. They have more options by doing that. And the commercial companies benefit because you have the support of a public or governmental entity, especially when it comes to legislative issues.
Thank you. I want to add something here, and that is the very much different opinions that we get on these type of questions from companies versus regulators or lawyers. I mean, I think most companies are taking the approach of, we can't find a way to make it happen, while when we talk with lawyers or with regulators, most of them are extremely careful, and the approach at the moment is it's impossible, and until you don't have full clarity, you cannot do nothing. You cannot do anything. But that might be, I don't know if some of you have found that case when talking with regulatory agencies, for example, or when talking with space agencies, that they had an approach, instead of trying to find a solution, they had an approach that's exactly the opposite, that things cannot be done until there's full regulatory clarity on this topic.
I can take that one. So we did face that viewpoint quite frequently early on, but after we had heard that said many times, it became clear that somebody was going to have to take the lead and sort of rather than waiting until they had full regulatory authority, to be the ones who establish what the pathway to commercial space resources looks like. And so that's why that regolith collection contract that we were granted was so significant, is we recognize that it's going to come with significant legal challenges, but rather than sit back and wait and see what happens, we wanted to have a seat at the table and be a part of those early discussions and sort of help pave the way for commercial companies to begin resource extraction activities.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, AJ. One technical question, because we haven't had one yet. This one comes from Alexandros Christou. In terms of the lunar radiation environment, where do you see the biggest challenges for the technologies and for the products that you are developing?
I reckon dust is going to be a real pain. I think regolith is going to stick to everything like nobody's business. And I think, I'm really looking forward to seeing humanity return to the moon, because I reckon that the first guys who hit the moon, they will be just like, it's everywhere, it's on everything, we can't get it off anything. And I think it's going to be really challenging to manage that egress of that dust, that regolith, into everything from electronics to clothing to power systems to the impact on communication transmission, power delivery, etc. I think we can certainly surmount it, but I think it's going to be really challenging. It's always the little things which trip you over, and in this case, I think regolith is going to be a real pain.
Absolutely, yeah. We think about dust probably too much for the average person. Yeah, it's a huge challenge for sure. And I agree. I think besides dust and radiation, another major challenge is the thermal environment. We think about lunar night and survival of lunar night and how cold it gets down to negative 200 C during those nighttime temperatures. And it's important that our assets that we send there, our products that we send there can survive lunar night, because it ultimately extends the duration of their missions, which really increases the value, the offering to different customers and payload developers. So it's really important that we get over that obstacle. It's been done in the past. It's usually done with nuclear technologies. But as we're heading more towards solar power technologies, things that are safer, less complex and easier to handle, and when you don't have access to the sun and you're a solar powered device, you need to find ways to store that energy so you can continue to power things like heaters and electronics inside of devices. So I think the battery and power management is really closely intercoupled with thermal management, and thermal is what we're seeing as one of the biggest challenges right now.
And from a material science standpoint, photovoltaic solar cells won't last nearly as long on the moon as they do within the Van Allen belt. Literally a couple of months likely, based on current simulation. So I think that the most challenging aspect for the radiation for the first initial missions will be developing solar cells either brought from Earth or utilizing the regolith that can last that radiation environment.
All right. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. I see one very interesting one about the long-term development from Martina Lofqvist. How do you see the lunar surface economy develop? So that is when good commercial activities overtake government-funded missions.
So I reckon we're going to see the first missions for the next couple of years are science-derived. Artemis is fully go. It goes well, it goes badly, but eventually we get some basically lunar hab development on the moon over the next 3 to 5 years. I reckon 2027, 2028, let's say we've had humanity to return to the moon, and big maybe there, I think still, but we've got some activity going there. I think very rapidly what will happen thereafter, though, will be the commercial companies. I mean, some who are represented here. I would expect Astrobotic basically to be hitting the ground hard pretty rapidly, Intuitive Machines and others, companies like SpaceBit doing exploration. And I suspect companies like Momentous and D-Orbit and others seeing this as an attractive place to get resource, and a more attractive place to get resource and get it back to effectively terrestrial orbit to be able to generate product. I reckon, though, if I was a betting man, I'd reckon 2030 is probably going to be, from my perspective, that kind of switch over from more government to commercial. Maybe a year earlier, but I'd say 2030 for being slightly cynical there.
Yeah, and I'm not certain that the division will be, perfectly clean either between, government funded and fully commercial funded missions. I think it will be blended, as we're already seeing. I mean, with the Commercial Lunar Payload System, true, that is a NASA funded program, but many of those payloads are fully commercially funded already. And so I think what we will see is sort of a progression from a primarily government funded mission as the profit motives are established to more and more, a greater percentage of the mission being commercially motivated.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we're seeing right now is already a paradigm shift in how governments are treating rides to the moon. Traditionally, it's been done all up government funding, but now agencies are looking towards commercial companies to be successful in their high-risk missions. I mean, all these companies that are doing these are small to medium-sized businesses that are growing and developing their landers and services to fly to the moon. And the hope is that we'll all be successful, but it's very high risk. And I think it's important that these commercial companies are successful because it will help validate the business model that smaller to medium-sized companies can go to the moon. And then once that happens, then I think the landscape opens up much more towards other companies that can get involved. The barriers to entry go down, costs go down. And I think that we're seeing a lot of interest now. There's programs like Artemis that will fly humans to the moon, but then after that, there's recurring missions with companies like SpaceX that would resupply the moon with continuous services, goods. The Lunar Terrain Vehicle is a vehicle that NASA is now soliciting, and that would be the rover that drives humans around, but also operates autonomously and could do, for example, lots of different payload experiments or search for resources. Big companies are going to be involved in that LTV opportunity, and that is going to be a segue to get Fortune 100 companies involved with the moon now. So I think we're going to see more programs like that. And I think a lot of it is predicated on the success of programs like CLIPS.
All right. Okay, thank you, everyone. We've run out of time. So thank you for the very good discussion. I really enjoyed it. I think we achieved with the panel, we had a lot of good questions and a lot of good interest from the audience. So I'm happy about that. I hope you enjoyed the panel as well and the discussion. And I will be looking forward to hearing more of your successes because I think you all have very promising companies and concepts. And I'm an optimistic person for the lunar economy. So hopefully we'll see more of you soon. All right. So Tony, I guess you're there.
Yes, thank you. You didn't run out of time. It was me actually asking to stop because you did actually great on time. Great questions, great panel. And thank you very much to the panelists to come. And thanks to Carlos, who's been a great entertainer. So I'm gonna stop the panel now. I'm gonna now move into the next session. Is a break of 15 minutes. So we will have a recording, video recording from Toptica Photonics. So bear with us. We will show you the recording from Toptica Photonics in about 5 minutes. Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.